Hey everyone, it's been a minute. I'd like to start by saying a big thank you to Emulators and Gameplay HD for letting me use their 4K footage of Metal Gear Solid 4 cutscenes. I currently don't have any means of playing MGS4, so can't capture my own footage. There's a link to their channel and the video in the description. Once again, thank you. It's appreciated. On to business. I don't usually like to front load videos with shilling, but this one is considerably longer and was a lot more challenging than my usual content. It's something of a break from my usual review style, being more of a character study across two games. I got really burnt out putting this together, so if you like it, then I'd really appreciate it if you engage with it. Maybe share it around to Metal Gear groups, and if you really like it, possibly subscribing and taking a look around at the other channel content. I'll talk a little more informally about what's going on with the channel at the end of the video. But for now, let's get down to business. This is a story of redemption. Not just for a character, but for his place in the fandom to which he belongs. The story of Raiden isn't just that of a soldier turned super agent turned ninja cyborg. It's also about his creator, Hideo Kojima, and of the world in the early 2000s when information was still throttled and controlled by only a few powerful media outlets. I think the biggest lesson I've learned from my experience with this, and other stories similar to it, is that while a character can make a bad first impression, if you understand the direction of the arc they're moving across, this can not only make you more forgiving of that, but also contribute to you ultimately falling in love with them and making them and their journey a part of who you are. This, however, was a lesson I could only learn by maturing, and so it would mean that for some time I would hold opinions of Raiden and his journey that were objectively wrong, or at the very least stemmed from a very narrow view of what makes a compelling protagonist. So with that in mind, why don't we get started? It's pretty hard to talk about Raiden without talking about the larger game series and universe to which he belongs, Metal Gear. Metal Gear Solid was released for the Sony PlayStation in 1998. While it's not the first game in the series, it's the one that catapulted the series to the level of fame it now stands at, and brought series creator Hideo Kojima's vision of what interactive entertainment could be to the world. Much of Metal Gear Solid's DNA was laid down in the original games. They are the stories of a lone soldier sent into an impossibly dangerous situation and expected to use a combination of stealth and puzzle solving to stay hidden from the enemies in the area and perform a series of tasks in order to basically save the world. The games featured stories like something that belonged in a 1980s American action movie, with over-the-top enemies, betrayal, and a one-on-one fight with the ultimate weapon, a giant walking battle tank called Metal Gear. For many of us, myself included, the story of the previous games was revealed through a synopsis that can be read before Metal Gear Solid is started, and pieced together from various conversations that happen throughout the game. Playing it now, Metal Gear Solid feels a lot more like an unfinished tech demo than a fully polished game. What I mean is that there's a lot of good ideas in there, but it's all fairly badly structured and disjointed. The tactical espionage action that the game's box promises takes up a very small part of the gameplay overall. What we have instead is a series of boss fights with larger-than-life characters that each have one or two different mechanics that can be used to bring them down. The world's greatest sniper and all-around femme fatale Sniper Wolf, for example, can be fought in an epic rifle battle out in a blizzard, but given how poorly implemented the sniping in this game is, you're going to be saving yourself a lot of trouble by finding a safe spot to stand in and fire remote-controlled missiles at her. This is by no means bad. It's not so much cheesing the fight as it's an example of light immersive sim elements. That is to say, most problems in the game have more than one solution with just a little lateral thinking, and that's something the series really leans into as it progresses. So we have this hodgepodge mesh of different encounters, usually connected by one or maybe two rooms that require you to hide from enemy guards, something that becomes infinitely easier once you've found the silencer for the pistol. But let's remember the year here, and the limitations of the hardware. It's unfair to judge Metal Gear's gameplay compared to the games that came after it, especially since these games built on the formula that this game laid down. It wasn't the gameplay that blasted Metal Gear to the heights that it attained. I mean, it's fun, don't get me wrong, but it was the incredible comic book story that really set it apart from the rest. The game is this wonderfully convoluted conspiracy, full of outrageous characters, all of whom have great voice actors. something that wasn't anything like standard for this generation.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
And it was these masters of their craft who filled these blocky, low-resolution character models with so much life and made us really care about them and their stories. And it was David Hayter who introduced so much of the world to Solid Snake. Solid Snake is a lot of things to a lot of people. I could and probably will dedicate an entire video to him one day. For that reason, I don't want to spend too much time talking about him now. But as he serves as a major point of comparison, a yardstick if you will, against which Raiden will be measured, it's kind of important we get a feel for just who he is and why he's so important. On the surface, Snake is every American hardman cliché distilled down into one single super soldier. He's a rugged man of war who's seen too much but doesn't know how to be anyone else or do anything else. He's got trauma and pain. He's lost friends and loved ones, often by his own hand. And as such, he finds it near impossible to have normal, healthy relationships with people. On the battlefield though, he comes alive in a way that makes us all envious. You see, Snake is a guy who's really good at his job. His enemies may have superior weapons, be inhumanly strong or gifted with psychic powers, but Snake is just really good at being a soldier. Later on in his story, we discover that he, much like Steve Rogers, belongs to something like the genetic elite for this particular field. But none of that really matters compared to the fact that he's just really committed and focused to the thing he's best at in all the world: killing people. He's an incredible power fantasy for players to slip into. In this game, Snake and by extension the player are the alpha predators. Sure, they're surrounded by hostile enemies, sure, they're all well armed and dangerous, but none of that matters because Snake will always find a way. Snake is an inspiring figure. He doesn't consider himself to be any kind of hero, but he fights because in the end he believes in what he's fighting for. There are numerous moments throughout the game where Snake really exposes himself to his comrades. In the later game, he finds himself captured and tortured for information, with the threat of a comrade's life being held in his ability to hold out. The codec conversations he has in between these sessions tell us so much about him, and show a vulnerability that make him feel all too human. Characters become relatable when they expose their pains and weaknesses to us. Sure, they may not have the same fears and pains we have, and seeing great heroes struggle with their problems and still rise to complete impossible challenges is really inspiring. Snake may be a cliché. He's even named after one of the most two-dimensional action heroes in cinema, but that doesn't mean that he can't inspire people, especially 17 to 18-year-old boys who are overweight and really lacking in self-confidence from years of systematic bullying at high school. Seeing Snake ride off into the sunset at the end of Metal Gear Solid, not truly knowing if he was going to die from a heart attack soon, but still willing to try to make a new and better life for himself, well, that was an emotional moment for me. With the launch of the PlayStation 2 in the early 2000s, a lot of buzz and very soon a lot of photos and video footage of Metal Gear Solid 2 found its way into glossy game magazines and onto the promotional DVDs that were attached to them. We saw and even got to play a little of this incredible new adventure that starts with our returning hero bungee jumping off the Hudson River Bridge onto a massive tanker. To go hunting for information on a new Metal Gear. Time has passed, but Snake hasn't changed at all. Well, he's grown a mullet. Even the demo that shipped first with Zone of the Enders and then later with a magazine showed a host of new features the game would have, making for better traversal and more options to bypass or remove enemies, even making zero body count runs truly possible. It's kind of funny, but in a way, this first section of the tanker that we all got to play probably has a longer period of just stealthing around an area than anything in the original game. Enemies were smarter. You couldn't just take them out or hide under a box for a few seconds if they spotted you. The stakes were higher, the gameplay more complete and polished, and it was an absolute wonder to behold visually. The game released in Europe in March of 2002, and you can bet your ass that I had that game in my PlayStation 2 the very day it came out. The camera fades in on the Verrazano suspension bridge. The white dots of its electric lights stand in contrast to the pre-dawn ambience, and we hear Colonel Roy Campbell's voice as he once again briefs Snake on the details of his new mission. As the scene is set concerning a massive offshore cleaning rig, military helicopters take center stage as they fly in low and fast like birds of prey homing in on their next kill. These choppers are carrying US Navy SEALs, who are about to launch a rescue operation, because this station, called the Big Shell, has been hijacked by terrorists. And not just any terrorists, a special turncoat unit called Dead Cell, along with Russian militia, have this place locked down tight. They've taken some high-profile hostages, and they are demanding an obscene amount of money in exchange for their safety. The Big Shell, according to the Colonel, was constructed in response to an oil tanker exploding in the New York Bay and spilling its load into the water. It exists as part of an ongoing cleanup operation, and as such there's a lot of dangerous chemicals in the water around the structure that could, if ignited, destroy the ecosystem within the ocean around the New York Bay and turn it into a toxic soup. This is bad because the terrorists have already claimed they've planted C4 all over the station and are more than willing to detonate. As the choppers move in for their final approach, a solitary figure emerges from the water to survey the scene, before descending back down below the waves to commence his own silent approach into the facility. This lone soldier is a member of the legendary Black Ops team, Foxhound, and he's here to safeguard none other than the President of the United States and disarm the terrorists and their collection of freak show leaders. As the figure gets closer to the protective fence surrounding the Big Shell, he finds a hole already cut into it and decides to take advantage of the opening. Something about this feels so familiar. A potential global catastrophe, important hostages, a special team that has switched sides, and a lone Foxhound soldier sent in all but naked to take care of the situation. It sounds like any other Tuesday for the legendary Solid Snake, but this is not Solid Snake. Everything is wrong. His body is too lean. His hair is too light. That voice is too young. Even his running animation has a different personality to it. As our masked protagonist explores the lower levels of the Big Shell, he stumbles into a room with unconscious guards and sees someone else is here. Is he another agent? A Navy SEAL? Or is he one of the terrorists gone rogue? No one seems to know. All our new hero, now codenamed Raiden, can do is hide and wait for the elevator to come back down and get to the surface. As he ascends into the light, Raiden...
The terrorists call themselves Sons of Liberty.
Sons of Liberty?
The name of their leader is Solid Snake.
The hero of Shadow Moses? So that's why you changed my code name.
Right.
Oh man, what do we have here? How did we get from a rugged, solidly built military veteran to someone who looks like he belongs in a K-pop band? And how exactly am I meant to take this kid who blathers on about his top-of-the-line VR training seriously? The big secret that Metal Gear Solid had a new protagonist had been revealed not long before its release, and given that it had come out in the USA and Japan quite some time before Europe, we all knew that it was coming, and there was definitely some mixed feelings about this. The game is divided into two sections. The first is the tanker mission starring Solid Snake that we played in the demo, and when we finally got to see the ending of this, it was... I mean, wow. The second section, which takes up the majority of your playtime, is the one starring Raiden on the Big Shell. The opening section on the Big Shell is jarring for a lot of reasons. Now, of course players don't actually have to do the tanker mission with Snake, but I suspect the majority of people who bought the game at the time were players returning after the first game, so of course they were going to play Snake's mission first. As such, it's a little frustrating that almost every time Raiden takes two steps, he's hounded by calls on his codec from the Colonel, who wants to explain some mechanic we've already used to him. Now, complaining about codec calls and cutscenes in a Metal Gear game is kinda like complaining about difficulty in a Soulsborne game. Metal Gear games have a lot of interesting mechanics, and the sooner you understand them, the sooner you're going to be really getting the most out of the game. There's also a lot of story front-loaded into the first hour or so, and while this is in no way a play-by-play of everything that happens, this section is also critical to the first impression that Raiden made on me as I was playing the game. For a start, we're introduced to Raiden's analyst, which we're going to be talking to every time we want to save our game. Metal Gear has an interesting save mechanic where, rather than escaping out to a menu or using a quick save function, you have to use your codec to actually call somebody in the game and transmit all of the combat data that you've acquired up until that point to them. It's a very interesting in-world mechanic similar to the typewriters in Resident Evil. This is contrasted by moments in the game where the Colonel will literally tell Raiden to press the action button to perform an action, effectively breaking the fourth wall and speaking directly to the player. Now, back in Metal Gear Solid, we got this cute Asian girl named Mei Ling, who knew a ton of old proverbs, and who reacts to being hit on by Snake like this.
I can't believe I'm being hit on by the famous Solid Snake.
So we're leaning a little more into that bad boy power fantasy. Raiden, on the other hand, gets...
Jack, is everything alright?
What are you doing here?
Jack, can you hear me?
Rose, you're not supposed to be involved.
I don't mind that he has a girlfriend. It's a layer to his character that Snake didn't have at the start of the previous game. And why wouldn't a young guy like this be dating some knockout anyway, right? But when talking to Raiden, she decides to drop this on him.
Jack,
What?
do you know what day it is tomorrow?
April 30th. Is there something special about it?
Isn't there?
The kid is in the middle of a life or death situation, and you want him to remember what's special about tomorrow? Guys, if your girl ever drops a line like this on you, just remember it shows a lack of trust and respect, and is basically emotional manipulation. She obviously doesn't care that she's placing undue stress on you, and is expecting you to jump through hoops so she can feel good about herself. It's a massive red flag in any relationship, and a sign that it's time to get out fast. Now sure, this kid has some fancy moves that lean into his ninja aesthetic, and we're able to maneuver past basic enemies pretty quickly, but the first time he comes up against a real challenge, well, things don't exactly go well for him. Vamp is actually a really interesting enemy, though I'd hoped I was done with blood-sucking immortals for a while after finishing my vampire video. But what's weird is how Raiden demonstrates terrible judgment in just walking out into the open to gawk at him, and it's very clear that Vamp is all but ready to hand Raiden his arse when... Get down! And wait until you see who's under the mask. So let's take stock of this situation for a second here. I'm currently playing as a new protagonist I didn't ask for, and yet within a matter of minutes into the game, I know the guy who I want to be playing the game as is actually here on a mission of his own, and has basically had to save this new guy from certain death. Their conversation doesn't make things any better either. Snake clearly isn't impressed with Raiden's training, and honestly, Snake's opinion of this kid is going a long way to affecting my opinion of him too. Maybe we can shed some light on all this though, by taking a look at the guy who created this situation and try to understand his motivations behind doing so. The Metal Gear series was created and directed by Hideo Kojima. Kojima is something of an auteur. Given the collaborative nature of game design, it's a little unfair to pin the success of any particular property on one individual. But having a strong and original vision from the start, and not being afraid to try something a little different, is going to go a long way to creating an exciting final project. His name also carries a lot of clout, and that means that investors and people on the publishing side, who would normally be very against taking a big risk, were willing to trust him. As such, they not only went along with his idea to switch out Solid Snake for a new protagonist, but also keep the reveal a secret up until the last minute. This was a bold move, though the brand name carried enough weight to basically market itself. It's also something that would be basically impossible to do in the modern day, where so-called leaked information is now the de facto norm for finding out details about upcoming games and movies. Konami didn't just keep this a secret, but they really leaned into it as a big surprise that was going to rock the gaming world and really put this game on the map. The marketing team even went so far as to produce trailers and gameplay footage that actually switched out Raiden's character model for Snake because they were so invested in this reveal. I can only imagine the response this would garner in the modern day, what with the gaming community being so open to new ideas, and always reacting in a reasonable manner to any big announcement made about a popular game. I've actually come across media describing Raiden as a bait-and-switch protagonist, implying something malicious in this change, as bait-and-switch is basically a kind of fraud. This, however, couldn't be further from the case, and while I won't name the outlet that described Raiden as such, you can rest assured I will never trust their journalism again. Kojima is a storyteller first and foremost. He's a lover of movies, books, and other media. One of his most famous games outside of the Metal Gear franchise is Snatcher, and that's basically just a visual novel with a fairly basic shooting minigame attached to it. Solid Snake is Kojima's homage to all those old American action movie heroes. Tough guys who can stand against any odds, and are willing to fight and die for greater ideals such as freedom and justice. The kind of guys you'd see regularly taking out Russians and Nazis, while American flags blew in slow motion in the background. Oh, how things have changed. Kojima commented that his idea for Raiden came about in part from the Sherlock Holmes books. The point of view character in these books is Dr. Watson, but the protagonist is Sherlock. It's through Watson's observations of Sherlock that we get an idea of how amazing this character is. It's partly because Watson loves him so much that we fall in love with him ourselves. Way back in the first Metal Gear game, when Solid Snake was still a rookie, tasked with bringing down one of the most dangerous men to ever walk the earth, he is assisted by a captured veteran called Frank Yeager, a Foxhound member of such legendary skill that he actually received the codename Grey Fox. Mr. Yeager's fate is somewhat complicated, but the point is, he was Snake's surrogate father on the battlefield. Snake looked up to him, learnt from him, grew stronger through him, and while there were other motivations for creating Raiden and revealing him in the manner that he did, Kojima wanted to give Snake a chance to be that person for someone else. What I would call the game's extended tutorial climaxes first when we meet Fortune. She's a member of Dead Cell who got her name from being so lucky that bullets just don't hit her. She wipes out the Navy SEALs, which leaves the job they had of disarming the explosives located around the big shell on Raiden's lap. And our boy takes it just about as well as he's taken everything else up to this point.
Colonel, you know I'm no bomb disposal expert.
Yup, so we have to do it ourselves.
But I've never defused a bomb before. Colonel, you know I've never been trained in bomb disposal. Colonel, I'm not qualified for bomb disposal.
But he eventually links up with Mr. Pliskin and bomb disposal expert Peter Stillman, another person very unimpressed with Raiden.
What's your name?
Raiden.
That's an odd name.
Is he one of the terrorists then?
No, somehow I don't think so. If there's someone to suspect, I'd put my money on you.
And they concoct a plan to remove the threat of the bombs by simply freezing them. So, since we're here, I want to make a small segue into talking about gameplay mechanics. I mentioned before that the first Metal Gear feels somewhat disjointed. There's a lot of fun ideas in there, but none of it's very well connected. It's just, here's the stealth section, here's the shooting section, this boss needs grenades, this boss needs rockets, etc. It feels unfinished in that sense. But the level of refinement in this game is so much better. Let me explain. Raiden needs to defuse a bomb in every strut, and is largely left to his own devices to take care of this. This is probably the most time you get in either of the first two Metal Gear Solid games to explore an area without being interrupted by a cutscene or a boss fight. But it's also a great example of a gradually ramping up difficulty curve and presenting players with little puzzles that have a ton of options for their solutions. As mentioned before, the radar that forms a big part of your situational awareness first needs to be activated by finding a node in each strut. Finding these nodes and gaining access to the radar is your first real priority, at least on a first playthrough. The difficulty here actually comes from the camera. Metal Gear plays in a quasi-top-down view that is reminiscent of its 2D roots. The problem is, this means your field of vision is very limited, and while this is also true of the enemies, they're going to see you before you see them. The game compensates for this with camera swinging when you are pressed up against a wall, and a first-person camera mode. This was upgraded in this game for shooting and combat, but it's pretty poorly implemented overall, though it has its uses. So, first and foremost, you're quite free to choose your route around the Big Shell, but honestly, you're probably making more work for yourself going clockwise versus counterclockwise. You start off in Strut C, which is a kind of residential area for staff working there full time. Heading to Strut D puts you in the sediment pool area, which is a fairly large open area with little in the way of actual cover. The node for this room is on the far side to the entrance where you come in going this way, so unless you've got the guard's movement patterns and timings memorized from a previous playthrough, you're going to have a hard time crossing this section unseen and getting to the node. Contrast that with going counterclockwise, which takes us back to Strut B, an area we've already visited and already have access to the map for. So, the game doesn't exactly tell you which way it wants you to go, it just makes one direction a much bigger challenge versus the other. Once you're in an area and you've got the map, it's time to turn on the bomb detector and go hunting. And believe you me, none of these bombs are easy to find. This serves a couple of purposes actually. Were you just passing through these areas as you were prior to this section, then you'd only need to understand the guard's movements in a very limited capacity. But that's not the case here. You've got to search around these areas now, so you've got to slow down, take your time to study their movements, and figure out just how much time there is in their patrol routes for certain areas to be safe. Then you've got to move. You're going to be crawling and running, flipping into first person mode, looking around, checking that radar to make sure you've got enough time, and let's not forget, hiding in a cardboard box. The catwalks in between the struts are especially well designed. The timings for the guard patrol routes on these are really tight, so you'll have a very limited window of opportunity to move through. It's never really unfair, though it's nail biting, and if you overreach, you're going to be punished. But you can usually figure out for yourself what you need to do. On top of that, each one is just different enough in its layout and hazard choice that you never really feel like you're doing the same thing twice. Maybe there's two patrolling guards and you need to hang over the railing to get by one. Maybe there's a drone and a camera. Maybe there's multiple levels, a guy covering the area from the roof, claymores on the floor that need to be avoided or disarmed and collected for later. The game is constantly mixing it up and making you adapt to new stimuli. The warehouse in Strut F is one of the most interesting for this. You're actually going to be coming here quite a few times, and the game signals this clearly by having doors around the area that are labelled up as above your current security clearance to get through. This is telling you that you need to figure this place out. The bomb in this area probably needs the most creative thinking to actually access, and there's even some hidden areas for you to find if you look hard enough. This area also has a soldier who reports in when he's completed a patrol route. He's not the first one to do this, but he stands out because you come here a few times. This was a nice little addition from the previous game. Metal Gear has a lot of immersive sim elements in it, in that there's no real right way to get from point A to point B, and your inventory will get crammed full of a lot of things that you won't use depending on your playstyle. In Metal Gear Solid, taking down an enemy with a silenced pistol or a chokehold when no one was looking was a good way to buy yourself a little extra breathing room in certain areas. But these guys, if they don't report in, then someone's going to come looking for them. And if they find a dead body, or don't find anyone at all, what do you think their reaction will be? Punishment for failure in Metal Gear Solid 2 is also fair in that you have a last second chance to escape. Unlike the first game where that red exclamation mark equaled an all-out alarm and infinitely respawning guys homing in on you, now you have a moment to react and silence the guard before he sounds the alarm, or at the very least cheese the game by zoning before he finishes his call to his boss. Failure to do so, however, means the attack team comes in, and getting cornered by these guys means you're in for a losing fight. A fun one, no doubt, but not one you're walking away from. Even then though, if you can find a safe spot to hide, you can wait it out until they're recalled. This whole system has plenty of challenge, but it's not merciless and unwelcoming. This, however, is just the beginning. Once the last bomb is disarmed, things ramp up. All that stuff the game has been teaching you to do is now put to the test. After some story elements unfold, you're now on a timer. You've got to find a bigger and more dangerous bomb using a different sensor than you're used to, and you don't have a lot of time. Now you have to move fast and get back to the base of Strut A. All of that information you've acquired up to this point is going to be crucial. You need a fast, efficient route back to the very start of the game, or you're going to be out of time and out of luck. I absolutely love this whole section. It's so smart how it introduces you to all these different mechanics and threats, and even lets you experiment with how to get past them in a relatively safe way before piling on the pressure and making you run through it like a champion speedrunner. This chapter climaxes in a fight with the Fat Man, which is overall a really solid boss fight. For a start, it's one-on-one, which is the way I like it. He's got plenty of stage presence, and taking him down is a matter of simply doing all the things you've been doing up until this point. So, you have to run around, disarm bombs, and where possible find a moment to punch this guy out and pop a shot off into his head. It's like a test at the end of a term of study. No cheap tricks, no gimmicks, just the actions you've been taught to perform at a higher intensity, with higher stakes than before. So overall, this is a fantastic way to introduce the player to the game, and while bombs don't feature later on in the game, they'll have amassed a lot of other skills and got a feel for the game's logic that's going to be a big help for them in the future sections. So the gameplay is incredible. Even as far back as the demo, we were introduced to new mechanics like lockers for hiding ourselves or unconscious bodies in, cover mechanics for shooting, something I've been introduced to and really enjoyed in Operation Wimback, sexy magazines that can be used to distract guards, and even a hold-up system to shake items out of enemies, to say nothing of all the returning gems such as mines, knocking on walls, and that classic, the cardboard box. I never had any issues with the gameplay here. It's just, I let my first impressions of Raiden colour my whole experience of the whole story, and all the callbacks to the original Metal Gear had me feeling like I was in some cheap knockoff of a game that I loved, with the big reveal at the end being so convoluted and drawn out that I just wasn't interested by the time it got to where it was going. When the monumental near 1 hour cutscene that dumps the entire story on you at the end finally finishes, I was so checked out of the experience that I really didn't want to replay this game once it was over. But I was a lot younger back then, and what I wanted out of a story's protagonist was quite different to what I want now, and more importantly, I know and understand things about this character's future that I simply didn't know back then.
Playing the game now with fresh eyes, it's clear to see that defeating the Fat Man is a critical point in Raiden's arc. Until this stage, he was cast adrift in the events of the story and just floundering to stay above water.
It's like being in a nightmare you can't wake up from.
But defeating the Fat Man marks the moment Raiden first really asserts his own power on the story. The next boss fight is against a Harrier jump jet that Raiden must shoot down on foot on a bridge that's covered in C4. And just look at this shit-eating grin. Oh yeah, disarming bombs, I'm not trained for that, but fighting a jet on foot with limited space to maneuver? No problem, I do this every Tuesday. The next encounter with Vamp is likewise very different. Even though Vamp has set the stage and prepared the arena, Raiden is flush with options to bring him down, and aside from the very end of this fight, which seems to gain its difficulty from forcing you to engage with the fairly badly integrated first-person shooting mechanics, Raiden has plenty of options to wear down his health bar, from C4 to guns to grenades, or even his bare fists. And at this point, nothing is explicitly explained. You've played the game enough, just figure it out. Honestly, given the huge variety of options characters in Metal Gear games have at their disposal, you'd really only need to have a less linear level design and maybe a hub-style world for talking to NPCs and buying equipment, and you've basically got something akin to a lightweight immersive sim. That's foreshadowing. There's so much more to say about Metal Gear Solid 2's gameplay though. All of the features from the previous games are there, but it's all so much better integrated around the primary loop of sneaking and hiding. For example, the escort section of the game takes that original formula and mixes it up a little. It requires the player to take out all enemies and hide their bodies because this time, simply slipping past isn't going to cut it. I also love how the game doesn't explicitly tell you that you'll need a sniper rifle to shoot out the C4 sensors on this bridge section unless you call and ask about it. The devs just left some PSG-1 ammunition near the area and let you consider which doors you can open now that you couldn't before, and go looking to see what's behind them. Continuing on with the sniping, there's a later section where Raiden is covering another character with his gun while she crosses a dangerous area, and I really appreciate the optional easy mode that's worked into this. Basically, to avoid the player getting frustrated because, well, MGS sniping isn't that fun, the player can call Snake for help. At this point, Snake will take over shooting the targets, but Raiden will still need to be looking through his scope at them in order for Snake to see them. It doesn't completely remove all responsibility from the player, but it does mean you won't be getting frustrated trying to get it absolutely perfect if you don't want to. It's just so well thought out in regards to pacing and player experience, and it neither holds your hand through it nor insists you suffer through an unreasonable amount of stress just to progress small distances. This is real Chad level game design. The main villain of Metal Gear Solid 2 is former US President George Sears, aka Solidus Snake. He is the third clone, along with these two, of a legendary soldier and mercenary who's also the star of several games in the series, and who we'll talk about at length another day. During the Liberian Civil War, Solidus was dispatched to the front line, where he promptly murdered the parents of a young Caucasian boy named Jack, and assumed the role of father figure to the now orphan. Jack was promptly drafted into a small boys unit, and effectively brainwashed into a ruthless killing machine. He was made to watch American action movies that glorified war and death, and showed soldiers as great heroes. He was forced to participate in the murder of POWs and even civilians, and Solidus' adopted son was damn good at killing. So much so that he earned himself the nickname Jack the Ripper. This child is Raiden. In the aftermath of the war, the Small Boys unit was sent to America to undergo counseling and rehabilitation back into society, before being released into the care of foster families for a chance at a regular life. While most of the children accepted their past and carried their sins with them, Jack violently rejected it, and was so disgusted with himself that he repressed the memories deep down. That being said, he was drawn back into a military life, and selected for special training as a member of the Elite Special Forces unit, Foxhound. Or so it seems. Once on the battlefield, however, his past comes flooding back to him, and confronting Solidus only expedites the process. Now, stop to consider his first interactions with Pliskin. Raiden is talking about his extensive VR training, and Pliskin isn't impressed at all. He considers the idea of VR as simply turning war into a fun and exciting game, and not in any way reflective of the real thing. But in Raiden's case, war was introduced to him as a fun and exciting game. He was conditioned to feel excited about battle and death, and rewarded well for succeeding in training and obeying orders, no matter how terrible they were. Sure, he's had rehabilitation since then, but all that coding is buried inside him. War is a game to Raiden, and pain and fear are his normal. During one of Rose's tirades, she talks about breaking into his room and finding it basically empty. His personal space was hollow, showing just how ill-adapted he is to regular life. I mentioned how I thought she was playing an inappropriate psychological games with him, but that's simply because she has to break some very important news to him, and she really doesn't know how to because, well...
That day at Federal Hall 2 years ago, it wasn't a coincidence. I was ordered to keep an eye on you.
Keep an eye on me?
Yes, by the Patriots.
You're a spy?
I suppose. Yes. It's an ugly word. Jack!
What?
I'm carrying... I'm pregnant, Jack.
And as to why this whole operation feels like some cheap knockoff of the Shadow Moses incident from the first Metal Gear, well, that's because that's exactly what it is. The real villain of Metal Gear Solid 2 isn't Solidus or Dead Cell, but rather a secret conspiracy, it's sci-fi guys, just deal with it, called the Patriots. They are represented here by an AI that...
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
The mission is a failure. Cut the power right now.
What's wrong with you?
Don't worry, it's a game. It's a game just like usual.
You'll ruin your eyes playing so close to the TV.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's weird. Though I like this meta moment here. On one hand, they are leaning into Raiden's war as a game mentality and telling him to stop. On the other, they're directly berating the player for playing a game long enough to get here, when there's a million other things they could be doing with their time. Their motives are best explained in this video that I'll link in the description, though considering the view count on this, I have a sneaky suspicion you've all already seen it. They created this situation so that they could dangle Raiden over the shark tank and see how he responds. Remember all his complaining earlier? It's all by design. And honestly, had Snake not showed up when he did, I suspect this experiment would have gone south really early. The third act of Metal Gear Solid 2 is still pretty clumsy. The plot is needlessly complex, with two big reveals happening within minutes of each other, and a massive amount of exposition dumped onto the player in a relatively short time. This is pretty par for the course with Kojima, but that doesn't mean it's actually good. Much like with the opening tutorial and setup dump, they really needed to space all this out, and have gameplay in between it all. That being said, it does lead to a hell of a conclusion. The conspiracy is finally unmasked, and things start to get very weird. We are also introduced to Raiden's sword. This was an interesting idea, but it's about as well implemented as the first person view mode, and it's pretty clumsy overall. Basically, the right analog stick is used to make horizontal and vertical cuts. It definitely had potential, but it needed work, and it really needed to be introduced much earlier in the game so that players had a chance to get really good with it. The climax is epic, with Raiden set upon by 3 Metal Gear Rays, though they aren't as tough as Snake's fight with Rex if I'm being honest, and a duel between Raiden and his surrogate father, the man truly responsible for him being who he is now, Solidus Snake. In the aftermath of the fight, things take a turn for the philosophical. Raiden has completed his hero's journey, ending in a literal confrontation with his father, and finally coming to terms with who he was. There's a lot that happens in this conversation between Snake and Jack, but the message is clear. Jack doesn't have to be dictated to by his past. Whether they be real memories of his time at war, or false ones created through his brainwashing, he can choose who he is now, and he can live the life he wants, fight the battles he believes in, and ultimately become who he wants to be. The camera fades out, and Raiden wouldn't take center stage in his own game again for 12 years. In 2012, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, I'm really not sure if Revengeance is a real word, came to PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and PC, and it was finally time to see what kind of man Raiden chose to be. Wow. That's certainly something. Still, Metal Gear has always been over the top and fun, but hey, it's not like the game ever played fast and loose with the laws of physics or anything like that, right? So, I suppose we should talk about how the hell we got here first, huh? So I think by now we can all see two things clearly. Raiden made a bad first impression, but his character arc is really amazing. It's his bad first impression that makes his transformation so significant. Had he just been as competent as Snake from the word go, we'd be dealing with something like a Mary Sue character and wondering where his flaws were. Unfortunately, many people, myself included, never really got past that first part back when the game came out. Simply put, we just didn't get it. We wanted Snake. We wanted our big, strong power fantasy back. and so when Raiden blossomed into such a powerful, competent character, we just didn't see it because it wasn't what we wanted. Some of the criticism holds true though. For example, the world didn't need a younger, sexier Solid Snake because the Snake we already had is just fine. I mean, look at this guy. Look at those abs. Look at how he rocks that cardboard box. While the ending of Metal Gear Solid 2 implied that something different was in store for Raiden in the future, his initial reception led to Kojima taking a step back and rethinking what exactly that was. Feedback and editing is a crucial part of the creative process, and it can be easy for artistic minds and egos to run a little wild without it. Now it's true that design by committee can destroy a creative process completely, which is why we have so many unfinished broken game husks utterly devoid of creativity and a soul being released these days. But having a couple of extra trustworthy voices telling you something isn't working for them is very important in bringing out the very best in an artist. In writing, the axiom basically goes, the first thing you write will always be shit. A more palatable way to interpret that might be, you do yourself a disservice to assume that your first idea, no matter how good, is the best one you'll have. I write stories myself, and sometimes I write scripts for a YouTube channel that no one's ever heard of, and my best work has been born from the ashes of something torn apart, albeit gently, by those who read the initial draft. So it was time for our rockstar auteur to take a step back and consider that not everything he touches turns to gold, and that maybe it'll take something a little drastic to salvage this one. The first boss fight in Metal Gear Solid is with Foxhound veteran and series regular
Revolver Ocelot.
It's not that good.
I love to reload.
But it ends with...
What? My hand! Stealth camouflage. Can't you even die right? You were lucky. We'll meet again! Who are you? I like you. I have no name.
Holy anime weebo shit, Batman.
It's like one of my Japanese animes.
Yeah, that's what I said. The Stealth Ninja appears at several points in the game, including one of the most memorable boss fights. His story is closely tied to Snake and concerns an elite soldier who was codenamed Grey Fox.
Grey Fox. Colonel, that ninja is Grey Fox.
Snake's one-time mentor, best friend, and father figure. After Fox's supposed death, his body was used in experiments for a kind of exoskeleton that would revive and sustain him while enhancing his combat prowess. The project was a complete success. Mostly. The Cyborg Ninja is absolutely iconic to the Metal Gear series, and even has several VR missions of his own that I replayed a lot. With the events of Metal Gear Solid 2 being a kind of stage recreation of the Shadow Moses incident from the first game, a ninja also featured there as well, and had a few cool moments as well as striking Kamen Rider style poses. Now, strap in for a ride here guys, there's a little to explain about this one. The ninja in this case is Olga Golukovich, a former Spetsnaz and soldier in her father's private army, right up until his death. Olga was blackmailed by the Patriots, who stole her daughter at birth and later injected the child with nanomachines that would kill her should Raiden's life signs terminate. As such, she becomes a double agent, working seemingly for Ocelot and Dead Cell at first, but secretly helping Raiden out in the guise of the Stealth Ninja. Olga ultimately sacrifices herself to save Raiden's life, and in turn the life of the child she never knew. In the aftermath of Metal Gear Solid 2, Snake promises Raiden that they'd rescue Olga's child. Now, let's fast forward to Metal Gear Solid 4, where we find Snake escaping a tight situation surrounded by dangerous Gecko unmanned gears. These are new combat drones based on the design of Metal Gear X, and as the enemy closes in, who should step in to save the day.
Raiden.
While Raiden and Snake had succeeded in rescuing Olga's daughter, Raiden hadn't exactly gotten away unscathed. His brain and spine had been grafted into a new exoskeleton system designed by the Patriots. Back in the real world, the reveal of Raiden's redesign and his position in Metal Gear Solid 4 was met with fanfare. People loved it. They got it now. This wasn't some cheap imitation of a character they loved. This was a unique character with his own strengths and vulnerabilities, and he would move and fight in a very different way to Snake. And that brings us back around to the Platinum Games developed Revengeance and Raiden's final form. Revengeance is a kind of epilogue to the legend of Solid Snake, with the Patriots defeated but their legacy living on in one form or another. Metal Gears and other unmanned weapons are now a feature of most militaries around the world, and it says a hell of a lot about both Raiden and the state of war in this version of the future that the first boss encounter is one of the final boss encounters from the previous game. The stakes have clearly risen drastically. Private military companies and private security companies, such as Maverick Security Consulting, whom Raiden now works for, and soldiers outfitted with cyborg enhancements are now the norm in the world. It is one such group of cyborgs, formed of a hodgepodge collection of colourful characters called Desperados Enforcement, who make up our main antagonists for this game. And man, these guys are so much fun. Actually, fun is the optimal word here. The Metal Gear series has always done a good job of trading realism and seriousness for entertainment, while still making all the serious beats work. But this game leans pretty hard into its comedy in quite a few areas. The plot is considerably less layered and much easier to follow, with basically no big twists and turns. But it's much more in keeping with this kind of fast-paced, blunt force gameplay. And this gameplay, oh my god. Nothing.
Better take out that UG quick. I want to try to...
Nothing. Absolutely no other game makes my pulse race like this one. Wow, there's a new contender, but that's a story for another day. Originally announced in 2009 under the name Metal Gear Solid Rising, it was initially developed by Kojima Productions. However, because of difficulties implementing the swordplay, the idea was shelved for some time. The analog stick action in Metal Gear Solid 2 was a nice idea, just like the concept of a fully motion-controlled sword game is also a nice idea on paper, but neither of these things really hit once they were implemented. Red Steel was the first game on the Wii to use the motion controller for swordplay, and it was kind of a mess. No More Heroes, on the other hand, now that game is a classic. The golden ticket seems to be using regular combat controls for most of the combat, but in specific isolated situations, have your special gimmick controls as a way for the player to really cut loose. Figuring this out though required a developer that has more experience with this kind of insane, high-octane combat, and so they brought in Platinum Games, a studio that has never, ever, ever, ever made a bad game. Ever. Stop looking at me. The team put together an incredible, easy-to-learn, difficult-to-master combat system, along with some of the most fun and memorable boss fights I've ever encountered. At its core, it uses a simple light and heavy attack, and you make combinations based off mashing the two buttons in different orders. Between missions, however, you can unlock new movesets that are performed by pressing the different attack buttons with different timings. Implementing these, aka getting good, will refine your combat prowess and significantly amplify your damage output. The other option is to pick up one of the sub-weapons that becomes available after you've defeated a boss and use that to mix up your attacks. The staff is one of the first you'll get, and has great reach and combination potential to help first-time players get more out of the game without having to slave over mastering timings. From start to end, I'd say the game is very accessible, with only the last couple of bosses really demanding that something extra out of you. The game uses an active parry system instead of a block button too, and thank God for that! If you need some context for that outburst, go watch my Blood Omen 2 review. This is probably where I spent most of my energy, as it's the most brutally efficient way of dispatching enemies. Prior to attacking, all enemies will have a small towel in the form of a red glint in their eye. That's when you have to pay attention. When the blow comes, go for the parry. Perfect timing will be immediately followed by a counterattack from Raiden, and on regular enemies, that takes you into an instant kill via Blade Mode. Blade Mode is a system that uses the analog sticks for cutting up enemies into pieces. It's a versatile system that allows for limbs to be cut off to cripple an enemy's attack power, insane hack and slash finishes, and even very precise cutting. Oh yeah, and this game invented glory kills that refill your health bar too. And that never ever gets old. Some enemies actually need multiple parries before the counter hits, and the whole thing has a strange fencing feel to it. It's a bit of a gamble to simply stand and wait for an attack, and not every enemy can be put down efficiently using this system, but the payoff is really big. And in the event you do take a lot of damage, it's the fastest way to get that glory kill and refill those bars. The game isn't all relentless forward momentum though. Well, not if you don't want it to be anyway. As in every Metal Gear game, Raiden can find several cardboard boxes to help him stealth around. I mean, yes, these are next generation combat cyborgs, but no, they don't have X-ray vision, or Predator vision, or even sufficient memory storage to notice that a box has changed its position, or just straight up appeared out of nowhere. But who cares? It's fun, and it's Metal Gear. It's what we do.
See the item called cardboard box? Didn't seem much use to me, but Miller was adamant that you'd want it on the list. The last word in infiltration technology, or so he said.
The point of these is for silent takedowns. When entering an area, you often have the chance to do so silently and get an instant kill on any unsuspecting foe. This is very useful when dealing with the more dangerous unmanned gears and larger cyborgs. There are also small side objectives involving hostages, and if you want to rescue them, you'll need to get the drop on the enemy. This whole system is really well put together. There was a very clear idea of what the player experience was supposed to be, and everything in here works in service of that experience. There's no fluff. Nothing is gated off behind a paywall or excessive grind. This is a game about being a robot ninja, and Platinum Games made the best robot ninja experience imaginable. It wouldn't be right to not mention the music and sound design in this game too. The intense pulsing music really sets the scene for the combat, and the bosses all have their own incredible themes that just make taking them on an absolute joy. But I will say, this was a little bit of a gamble. This isn't your regular non-offensive game music. It's geared at a very specific taste, but it also just fits the situation and pacing so well. It was a bold move in that it could straight up alienate some players who just don't like this kind of thing. The intense combat themes are contrasted with slow, ambient music that is very reminiscent of other Metal Gear games. And then the combat sound effects just give all your attacks real weight and power, and make the whole system really satisfying to engage in. Back when I first played this, it hit me just as hard, if not harder than the first Devil May Cry did. Of course, DMC 3, 4 and 5 are all better than DMC 1, but they are incrementally improved versions of the formula laid down by the first game. I had never played anything like Devil May Cry prior to that, and believe me, I was not prepared for what was in store when I loaded that into my PlayStation 2 for the first time. Almost nothing has hit me as hard since then, but this was something else entirely. Raiden has developed so much since he first arrived on the Big Shell as some kind of bootleg Solid Snake. He's matured into a warrior who fights for a cause. He's saved lives, and was instrumental in the destruction of the Patriots. But there is one final thing that he has yet to deal with. The time has finally come for our boy Jack to confront his inner demons. It takes a special kind of villain to truly bring out the best in a character. Someone who stands not exactly opposed to them, but more as a reflection of themselves. A person they could very well be if things were just a little different. This kind of villain will respect and even admire our hero, even as they fight against them. And as our hero grows from their encounters with their nemesis, so too our villain maybe starts to doubt their own actions and motives. There are many memorable and crazy characters in this game, including Sundowner, who's voiced by Crispin Freeman, who's also the definitive BJ Blazkowicz. And of course the walking talking meme machine that is Senator Armstrong. But none of these guys are as important to both Raiden and the story as the charismatic sword saint, Inigo Montoya.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Sorry, I meant Jetstream Sam.
But our more immediate problem is Jetstream Sam. I believe you've met.
The only problem I see is that nickname.
Sam is really well written and has a significant impact on both Raiden and the player, despite having fairly minimal screen time. Were this a true Metal Gear game, then we'd probably be subjected to lengthy cutscenes full of deep introspection from these two. But this is a fast-paced action game, and that means forward momentum. Sam first appears in the opening scene and is, sadly, an undefeatable boss. While this is fine in terms of the game's story, I really appreciate how in Devil May Cry 5 and Sekiro, you can outright kill the final boss in your first encounter. It's like the ultimate Chad moment for fans. Well, no damaging Virgil on Dante Must Die mode is probably the true prize. He's a near perfect boss fight after all. That being said, the important thing here is this: Sam fully accepts and embraces who he is. He's a man of great honor, and much like Ryu in Street Fighter, he searches for the perfect opponent to face in battle. He is ready to die in a heartbeat, and while he is motivated by ideas of justice and vengeance, he also seeks for a higher purpose and the perfection of his skill. Sam isn't actually a part of Desperado's enforcement. Rather, he's a free agent who was initially on his own personal crusade against injustice. He was lured into a confrontation and finally defeated by Senator Armstrong, but given a chance to join up. Sam does so thinking that maybe what the Senator has in mind, though drastic, might actually have a significant impact on the world and bring about a positive change in the long run, though it becomes clear later on that he's very conflicted about this. And there it is, a true warrior with his own sense of justice, fighting for a cause he believes in, so much like Raiden, but who just stumbled at the last minute. The first fight with Sam ends badly when, in his own words, Sam realizes,
"You deny your weapon its purpose!"
It ends with Raiden losing an eye. What is that all about? The plot thickens later when Raiden discovers he's dealing with the trafficking of children with the intention of transforming them into a new breed of child soldier, just like he was. And when I say just like him, I mean exactly like him. The children's brains are extracted from their bodies and installed into cybernetic casings, where a new style of VR training, completely indistinguishable from the real thing, is fed into their senses. The training in question is living out Raiden's experience as a child soldier. The children learn that war is a game, and that success brings great rewards, while failure is punished with great pain. Things get very real in a lab in Mexico, where Raiden is made to choose between the many and the one. Brutal. Unmasking a private military company called World Marshal as the main operator in this disgusting affair, Raiden promptly resigns from his own security company, whose hands are too tied by corporate politics to actually move against World Marshal, and goes on a one-man vendetta against them. As he approaches their headquarters for his showdown with Sundowner, he is once again met by Jetstream Sam. Sam taunts Raiden for treating war like a game. I'm sensing a pattern here. He chastises Raiden for hiding in his high-tech cyborg body, free of pain and able to kill the inferior cyborg models, seemingly free of consequence. He exposes Raiden to the thoughts of his enemies, the fear and hesitation, and Raiden is once again disgusted with himself. Long ago, Raiden was a child soldier, so brutally efficient at his job that he was nicknamed Jack the Ripper. In the aftermath of his rehabilitation, he was so disgusted with his actions that he rejected them violently, repressing the memories deep inside himself. But we can't bury our shadows in darkness, lest they draw power from it and become something far more terrible. Something that can destroy us. This theme is covered wonderfully in Persona 4. The gist of the story here concerns a serial killer who kills by casting his prey into a terrifying shadow world where their personal demons manifest as powerful monsters. If the victim rejects their demon, it becomes a dangerous free agent and destroys them. The team in Persona 4 are tasked with fighting through the victim's palace and defeating the demon. This doesn't solve the problem, however. Only by embracing their darkness can the victims not only escape their death, but also transform their darkness into unimaginable power. And so it is, when faced with the powerful monsoon, that Raiden enters his final form.
Doctor, turn off my pain inhibitors.
What? This is madness. You
do it!
All right.
He may be a killer, this may be a fun game to him, but if he accepts this, he can use it to make sure no one else ever suffers the fate he had. And Sam seems impressed.
I'll take this dance. No, sir.
From this point on in the game, the powerful Ripper mode comes available, and wow. Early in the game, Raiden faces and defeats Blade Wolf, a cybernetic dog controlled by a powerful AI capable of learning and even readjusting its own parameters based on information it receives about the world. A skill a few Twitter users could do with mastering. After defeating it, Raiden recruits it to his own cause. Blade Wolf is the character we have the most contact with throughout the game. Codec calls are possible, but not really as essential as in Metal Gear Solid, and they pull us too far out of the fast-paced action. Wolf is a fun character, and an absolute savage.
Remind me to teach you about sarcasm sometime.
I understand your attempts at humor. I simply do not find them entertaining.
Wolf also respects Sam. This is important because it tells us something about Sam, that there's more to him than a mere mercenary. Wolf even comments about Sam's recent shift in personality as if something's wrong. At the point of Raiden and Sam's final showdown, we find Wolf and the charming anti-hero engaged in a little talk, and it seems Raiden has had an impact on Sam too.
2 years I've been working towards this, and on the last day, Blondie has me doubting the whole thing.
The fight with Sam is pure boss fight cream. It's fast and intense. There are a variety of phases you need to learn, and while he will punish you for messing up, he doesn't wreck you in 2 hits. So you have time to learn and adapt and adjust, making him a great challenge, but not one you have to commit hours of your life into defeating while you beat your head against the table and scream at your monitor. So remember how the first boss of this mess was one of the last bosses of Metal Gear Solid 2? So there's probably some degree of escalation to deal with, right? Understatement. This game has the best boss fights. My god, this is so fun. But this isn't even the best part. Oh man, it's time to talk about the Senator. Senator Armstrong is a far less complex villain than Solidus Snake. While what Solidus did to Raiden is objectively deplorable, he himself is quite a complex creature. Solidus has ideals, and is, in his own way, fighting the same battle that Solid Snake is against the Patriots. At the start of Metal Gear Solid 2, the leader of the Sons of Liberty is identified as Solid Snake, though since Snake is believed to be dead, it's assumed he's an imposter. I'm not 100% sure what Solidus' motivation was in using his brother's codename, though it certainly provokes a hell of a reaction from a man who's made his whole career out of being patient and careful in dangerous situations.
No, that is not Solid Snake.
Perhaps this was by design? Solidus was once president of the United States, but he, like all presidents it seems, was nothing but a puppet of the Patriots. At some point in his career, he grew resentful of this and rebelled against them, effectively signing his own death warrant and leading him to set the events in motion that would lead to the Shadow Moses incident in the first game and the events of Metal Gear Solid 2. To escape the Patriots, Solidus planned on literally building his own nation, as his clone father Big Boss had once done before. He is also the classic father figure nemesis of many a hero's journey. He was responsible for creating Jack the Ripper, and the idea of Raiden using the skills his father gave him to ultimately overpower him has significant meaning. On one hand, Solidus fails. He is defeated and killed, and his dreams of escaping the Patriots and a great rebellion against them fall to nothing. On the other, it is the greatest moment in any master's life when their student finally surpasses them. What's also interesting is that Raiden goes on to join Snake in a war against the Patriots, effectively picking up the torch dropped by his father. Senator Armstrong, on the other hand, has much simpler motivations, and seems to revel in the idea that he's the bad guy. I mean, the guy is literally financing child abduction, brainwashing, and even organ harvesting. But it's okay because those aren't American kids, so they can't possibly be real people. The utter disdain this man shows for human life versus the drive to jumpstart America's economy is both absurd and yet scarily close to reality. The senator is a stereotype. At least I hope so, conservative Americans. He's a man consumed by greed and a drive for power. He's corrupt to his very core, willing to destroy the lives of innocents and even stage an attack on his own president just to start a war that he can profit from. Unlike with Solidus and Sam, Raiden isn't really meant to learn anything from the senator. He's just meant to be the final challenge, a test of Raiden's new mettle and beliefs, the final gateway before Raiden can go out and effect real change in the world. He's powered by
Nanomachine, son!
Why does this sound familiar? He's motivated by personal gain, and he doesn't give a damn who gets destroyed in the process. Like all politicians, he has a twisted sense of logic to justify his actions. If not to himself, then at least to everyone who he wants to vote for him. It's all for America. America has to be number one. The status quo must be held in check, whatever the cost. You know, I recently played another game that shows what a terrible idea that is. He claims that he wants to...
They'll make America great again!
You really couldn't make this up if you wanted to. He is hateful in the way he taunts and bullies Raiden, and it really works you up to this moment when Jetstream Sam and Blade Wolf have one last thing to say.
I have established new parameters now, created my own directives.
You little fuck! Damn mutt! Armstrong!
And while Raiden is a true warrior who fights for greater causes, and whose sword would never be drawn in spite or vengeance,
This isn't my sword.
Senator Armstrong is brutal. He can wreck Raiden's health bar in a few hits. But it's okay at this point, because the game has been training you for this since it started. Every trick the Senator has, we've seen before, and just like Raiden, we are not going to back down at this last hurdle. We are ready to give it our all, here and now. I will never forget the first time I took down the Senator. I literally screamed, "Oh my god," when it happened. I was so emotionally invested in this story, and I'd had to fight so hard for this final victory that I jumped out of my chair. And so finally, we have reached the end of our journey with Raiden. Well, somewhat. The phenomenal leaps forward in character that occurred in Rising, and my taste maturing finally led to me returning to Metal Gear Solid 2 and seeing the story for what it really is, and appreciating the game far more than I had before. I think a lot of people experience the same thing after seeing Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 4 and Revengeance. It's such a powerful transformation, and we can see the seeds of it right there in that first game. The hero Raiden becomes is easily as strong and powerful as Solid Snake, but in his own unique way. And being part of both those first stumbling steps and his epic conclusion is what makes this journey so incredible. The fate of the Metal Gear IP at the time of writing is unclear. Kojima has long since left Konami and is exploring new stories and experiences. Konami themselves barely produce anything worth a damn these days. All their wonderful stories now exist in limbo or as pachinko machines or, most disgustingly of all, NFTs. But this feels like a good place for it to end. Raiden, like Sam before him, goes on to wage his own war against corruption and exploitation, and, well, you know what? I think Olga's daughter says it best.
I know all about his past. He had it rough. And he hurt a lot of people. But that's not the Raiden I know. The Raiden I know is a hero.
Hey everyone, welcome to the end of the video. If you made it all the way here, then thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I do these mostly for me, but it does feel good to know that other people enjoy them. I'm not sure what's coming next right now. I do want to cover other Metal Gear protagonists, but given what a challenge this one was, I'll need to space out those studies. I had originally planned to do a video on Disco Elysium next, but my playthrough got derailed when I finally decided to try a Dark Souls game, and after finally getting it, going on to play Sekiro. I do want to talk about both those games at some point, but given how often you die on a first playthrough, I had no intention of recording and wading through all those failed boss attempts to find good footage, and I'm not sure I have the mental energy for a replay just yet. I have been inspired to do some of my own fan art in the form of a 3D render of the Fallen Knight armor that I wore from start to finish for my first playthrough. This may become a Skyrim mod at some point, but I'm not 100% sure. It's a lot of work, and since I don't play Skyrim anymore, I'm not sure I want to go there. There are a couple of smaller indie games I'd like to talk about, such as Mark of the Ninja, Nihil Umbra, and Last Day of June, but I'm still undecided. So it might be a bit longer until the next one anyway. Either way, thank you all for your time, and I hope you stick around until whenever my next video drops.